Islam, which means submission in Arabic, is a worldwide religion that was founded in the year 610 CE by Muhammad the Prophet, who is considered the founder of Islam. People who practice the religion are called Muslims. Muhammad was born about 570 CE, was a merchant who started spreading his new beliefs, which he got in his spiritual transformation in 610 CE. Muhammad's followers compiled his sayings and preachings in a book called the Quran, which is the holiest book of the Islam religion. Muhammad's growing popularity brought him into conflict with the ruling elites of Mecca, which led to him and his followers attacking Mecca in 610 CE. The foundation of the Islamic faith are obligations made by Muhammad called the Five Pillars, and also jihad, which are spiritual and moral obligations put on Muslims. The Islamic holy law is known as the Sharia, which were made by the Muslim jurists and scholars. Muhammad was never succeeded since he was considered the seal of prophets, so instead caliphs who leaded Muslims after his death. Muslim dynasties such as the Umayyad and Abbasid helped spread Islam, and between 633 and 637 CE, Islamic armies took advantage of weakening empires to expand the religion. The establishment of the Umayyad solved the problem of succession temporarily. The Abbasid dynasty was far more cosmopolitan than its predecessor. Disputes of who would be caliph after Muhammad's death resulted in the creation of the Shia and Sunni parties.
As merchants, soldiers, and diplomats traveled to other regions, they often encountered new plants, animals, and agricultural techniques, which they adopted and spread throughout the western regions of the Islamic world. New crops gave a wider variety as well as a greater quantity of food. They also introduced crops which were able to grow during the dry season, unlike most native crops. Some of the new crops also had industrial uses like cotton, which became the basis for the region's thriving textile industry. Increased agricultural production contributed to the rapid growth of cities in all parts of the Islamic world, which led to each of the cities having their own successful markets. By the time of the Abbasid Caliphate, elaborate trade networks linked all the regions of the Islamic world and joined it to a larger hemispheric economy. After conquering the Sassanid Empire, Muslim conquerors brought prosperous trading cities under their control, making it possible for Muslim merchants to trade over a revived Silk Roads network extending from China in the east to the Mediterranean in the west. Most merchant trades used camel caravans, while maritime trade was done by merchant ships using compasses to guide their direction. The prosperity of the Islamic Spain, known as Al-Andalus, illustrates the far-reaching effects of long-distance trade in the Abbasid era. The governors of Al-Andalus were Umayyads, who refused to recognize the Abbasid dynasty, and beginning in the 10th century, they appointed caliphs to enforce their own rule rather than having governors who would enforce Abbasid authority. Despite political tensions, Al-Andalus participated actively in the commercial life of the larger Islamic world. Arab women, unlike women in other lands, did not have many rights. For the most part, the Quran reinforced male dominance. The Quran and Islamic holy law recognized descent through the male line. To ensure the legitimacy of heirs, they subjected the social and sexual wives of women to the strict control of male guardians. While teaching that men should treat women with sensitivity and respect, the Quran permitted men to take up to 4 wives, whereas women could only have 1 husband. Among the most effective Islamic missionaries were the mystics known as Sufis. The term Sufi derived from the patched woolen garments favored by the mystics. Sufis didn't deny Islamic doctrine, but they also didn't find formal religious teachings to be meaningful. Thus, instead of concerning themselves with the fine points of the doctrine, Sufis worked to deepen their spiritual awareness. The most important of the early Sufis was the Persian theologian Al-Ghazali, who argued that human reason was too frail to understand the nature of Allah, therefore they could not explain the mysteries of the world. Only through devotion and guidance from the Quran could human beings begin to appreciate the uniqueness of the power of Allah.
Industrialization refers to a process that transformed handcrafted-centered economies into economies distinguished by industry and machine manufacturing. The principal feature of this process were technological and organizational changes that transformed manufacturing and led to the increase of productivity. Critical to industrialization were technological developments that made it possible to produce goods by machines rather than by hand, and harness inanimate sources of energy such as coal and petroleum. By the mid-18th century, several areas of the world, Western Europe, Japan, Russia, and North America, exhibited growing and dynamic economies that shared common features. High agricultural productivity in these regions resulted in significant population growth. High population densities, in turn, encouraged occupational specifications and permitted many individuals to work at tasks other than agriculture. Coal played a crucial role in industrialization. Until the 18th century, wood had served as the primary source of fuel for iron production, home heating, and cooking. The most crucial technological breakthrough of the early industrial era was the development of the general-purpose steam engine in 1765 by James Watt. The steam engine burned coal to boil water and created steam, which drove mechanical devices to perform their jobs. Steam engineering and metallurgy innovations both contributed to improvements in transportation technology. James Watt's steam engine did not adapt well to transportation use because it consumed too much coal. After his patent expired, however, inventors devised a high-pressure engine that required less fuel. In the 1870s, heavy iron and steel industries emerged in areas like western Pennsylvania and central Alabama, where there were abundant supplies of iron ore and coal. By the 1900s, the United States had become an economic powerhouse, and industrialization had begun to spill over into southern Canada. The vast size of the United States had been advantageous to industry because it made abundant natural resources available to them, but it also hindered travel and communication between the regions. To facilitate transportation and distribution, state governments built canals, and private investors established steamship lines and railroad networks. By the mid-19th century, industrialization had spread to France, Germany, Belgium, and the United States. The French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars helped set the stage for industrialization in Western Europe by abolishing internal trade barriers and dismantling guilds that discouraged technological innovations that restricted the movement of laborers. German industrialization proceeded much slower than did Belgium and France, partly because of political instability resulting from competition between many of the German states. After the 1940s, however, German coal and iron production soared, and by the 1850s, extensive railroad networks were under construction. After the 1870s, Russia embarked on campaigns to rapid industrialization. Government authorities took the lead in sponsoring industrialization, largely to strengthen their societies and enable them to resist military and economic pressure from Western Europe and the United States. In Russia, the government promoted industrialization by encouraging the construction of railroads that linked the distant regions of the massive empire. In the 1860s, Russia had less than 700 miles of railroads, but by the 1900s, there were more than 36,000 miles. Apart from drawing the regions of the Russian Empire together, railroads stimulated the development of coal, iron, and steel industries and enabled Russia to serve as a commercial link between Western Europe and East Asia. In Japan, imperial authorities pushed industrialization. The government hired thousands of foreign experts to instruct Japanese workers and managers in techniques of modern industry. The government also took the initiative by modernizing iron foundries and dockyards, founding new businesses and opening schools and universities specializing in scientific and technological fields. Government support was responsible for the construction of railroads, the opening of mines, the organization of the bank system, the establishment of mechanical industries producing ships, arrangements, silk, cotton, chemicals, and glass. Men gained increased stature and responsibility in the industrial age as work dominated public life. When production moved outside of the home, some men became owners or managers of factories, while the majority served as wage workers. Industrial work seemed to be far more important than the domestic chores traditionally carried out by women, or even the agricultural or light industrial work performed by women and children. Men's wages also constituted the bulk of the family's income. Like men, women had worked long hours in pre industrial times. Agricultural and domestic manufacturing could easily accommodate women's dual jobs as mother and workers, since the workplace was either at home or nearby. Industrialization dramatically changed the term of work for women. When industrial moved production from the home to the factory, married women were unable to work unless they left their homes and children in someone else's care. By the late 19th century, industrial societies neither expected nor wanted women to engage in labor, but instead encouraged women to devote themselves to traditional pursuits such as raising of the family, the management of the house, or the preservation of traditional family values. Industrialization profoundly influenced the childhood experience. Like their elders, children in pre industrial societies had always worked in and around the family home. Industrial work, which took the children away from the home and parents for long hours with few breaks, made the child labor seem pitiable and exploited. Early reports from British textile mills described sensational abuse by overseers who forced children to work from dawn till dark and beat them to keep them awake. Yet many families needed their children's wages to survive, so they would continue to send their offspring to the factories and mines.
For India to be independent and unified has been a long-term goal for the Hindus and Muslims. It all started way back in 1855 when the Indian National Congress was founded. The Hindus and Muslims cooperated to bring self-rule to India. Due to the Great War, India was left with a sparse amount of food and goods and dissatisfaction with the British. Nationalist leaders drew inspiration from Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points, which called for national self-determination. The British responded with violence. Mohandas Gandhi would then step on his home country once again. After leading a successful retaliation in South Africa for the segregation of Indians and the title of second-class citizens, Gandhi becomes aware of the issues in his home country and becomes very active in politics. He strengthened the influence of the Indian National Congress on the people with his charisma. Gandhi had a way with words in which it inspired people, gave them hope, and made him understandable to the less educated audience. He believes that they should be tolerant no matter the punishment of the British and not to retaliate. Eventually, the Hindus would overpower the Muslims and the Muslims decide to create a separate Muslim state in the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and created the Land of the Pure of Pakistan, which later split once again to create Bangladesh. The goal of a unified state was never truly achieved. After gaining independence in the 19th century, most of the independent countries in Latin America struggled to achieve political and economic stability. Neocolonialism had an impact on the independent political and economic development of Latin American states, but it did not fully prevent nationalist leaders from devising strategies to combat the newfound imperialism. After the war and the Great Depression, Africa also sought independence and unity. Africans were forced to participate in the war, whether they wanted to or not. The Paris Peace Conference ignored African requests for social and political reform. The persistence of colonialism led to the development of African nationalism. As nationalist uprisings gained widespread support, the Kwanzaa Emperor was forced to abdicate in 1911. Dr. Yatsen took over as the president without a plan. The republic soon falls into political chaos and a weak economy. The neglection of irrigation systems and the unequal treaties helped in the weakening of the economy. When the U.S. allowed Japanese interference in China, this became the reason to the becoming of the May 4th movement, in which many students and intellectuals were involved, such as Shan Fei, a young woman who believed in women's rights. set to rid China of imperialism and establish unity. One of the early members was Mao Zedong. Sun Yat-sen did not have the same beliefs as the Chinese Communist Party, and Yat-sen tried to unify China under the Nationalist Party. Once he died, Chiang Kai-shek took over and started the Northwestern Expedition and sent the Chinese Communist Party crawling to a small province in Southeast Asia called Yangtze, as he turned against them.
The most serious epidemic threat in modern times comes from AIDS, which slowly attacks and destroys the immune system, leaving the infected individual vulnerable to infections that eventually cause death. It is spread through sexual intercourse with an infected person, contact with contaminated blood, and transmission from mother to child during pregnancy and after birth through breastfeeding. Factors contributing to the spread of AIDS include poverty, ignorance, the prohibitive cost of drugs, and some say sexual promiscuity. Medical experts identified AIDS for the first time in 1981 among homosexual men and intravenous drug users in New York and San Francisco. The AIDS epidemic is a serious public health threat throughout the world, but the disease has struck the developing world hardest, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. A radical manifestation of Islam's resurgence was the creation of the Islamic State of Afghanistan in 1996 by the Taliban movement. When the United States government announced its war against global terrorism, it also pointedly targeted those harboring terrorists, that is, governments and states that supported and provided sanctuary for terrorists. Another international action against terrorism came in March 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom. 3,000 strong, largely made up of U.S. and British troops, but also including those from approximately 24 other nations. Hussein was finally caught in December 2003, but deadly resistance in Iraq persisted. The cost of the Iraq War climbed in terms of both casualties and expenditures. Thousands of Iraqi military personnel and civilians have died, as have over 1,000 coalition soldiers by late 2004. The United States has spent approximately $4 billion per month to maintain troops in Iraq. The status of women began changing after World War II. Women gained more economic, political, social, and sexual rights in highly industrialized states and developing nations. Agitation for gender equality is often linked to a woman's access to employment. The discrimination that women faced in the workplace was a major stimulus for the feminist movement in industrialized nations. In the 1960s, these complaints expanded into full-blown feminist movements that criticized all aspects of gender inequality. Women started to expose the ways in which a biologically determined understanding of gender led to their oppression. The U.S. Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of both race and sex. A well-established economic partnership is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, established in 1967 by the foreign ministers of Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Its principal objectives were to accelerate economic development and promote political stability in Southeast Asia. It was first made to deter communism. In 1992, member states agreed to establish a free trade zone to cut tariffs on industrial goods over a 15-year period.